Digital Echoes, revisiting the Venetian church of Crociferi from the perspective of artificial intelligence. This project is a revisitation of the Crociferi church, which was demolished and used to be located where today is the Jesuit church in Venice. Here is the location of the church, which is in Cannaregio, and this is Barbari's view of Venice with the representation of it with the monastery in the 1500s. In this map, we can see a summary of the concepts and the things that were explored during this research. This is to show how dynamic this subject can be. So this is such a small particle of what AI can do and its possibilities. Here we are dealing with the representation of architecture concerning artificial intelligence. For the experimental phase, we use DALL-E, that is a widely known tool featured in ChatGPT and which generate images from written inputs. Something interesting about this model and useful for this study is that you can refine the results. So in the same conversation of ChatGPT, you can add more details and characteristics to the image. In this map, we have an overview of the experimental process. The first step of it was to gather all the data available about the Crociferi Church, mainly based on written information from scholars, archives, and a few visual references. Then, the next step was to organize everything and divide the church into subgroups. So from these groups, we have built the prompts, which are the textual input that we need to provide to the machine in order to have an image. This procedure involves the raw input, which is the text that we have added, plus the whole training process of the machine. So this is where the black box concept comes into perspective. It means that we don't know exactly what happened in this framework between the input and the output. The machine, according to the dataset that it was trained on and the training model itself, will develop the results and give us back the images. So this black box is a key concept also for this research. From this output image, we can evaluate the results, if they are satisfactory or not. And then, after we evaluate the results, we can redesign the prompt or we can approve this image. Then we remodel the text in a way to make the machine interpret it better. This redesign of the prompt happened sometimes more than one time, depending on the image. And once the images were understood as enough, they were all organized and analyzed critically afterwards. We have analyzed the images from two perspectives. The first one from image composition, colors, and these kind of elements, and the second from architectural accuracy, which is comparing them to the initial references that we have. These were the main references that we use as source of information for the church. Alison Sherman, who developed a written reconstruction of it in her work, and Ludovica Galeazzo, who analyzed the whole island where the church was located. The church was built in the 15th century, but it went through a big renovation in the 1656 and was demolished in the 1718. So this was the time frame that we chose to focus, which was the second part of its existence. Here we have some examples that show how the church was depicted in many paintings from its external facade. Now we are going to head into the interior part, which we have a lot of descriptions, but we don't have any images of it. The church was divided in many altars and chapels, and each of it was sponsored by a wealthy family or a guild. This is an example of how we have mapped all the available information, grouping them by facade and altars, and by doing it, we have an overview of all the lost artwork, the existent ones, the general dimensions, and the position of elements, and we did this for all the interior facades of the church. As a result, we have more than 200 images that were generated based on each of the groups in which the church was divided on. These results, as I said before, are analyzed based on image composition and architectural accuracy. And behind each of these images, we have the prompts. Here's a general analysis of the color temperature. The saturation of the images for this mosaic were exaggerated on purpose, so it would be more clear to see the colors here. We have also decomposed the images in 5 colors in a way to see the predominance of tones. These ones are the images that presented a realistic style, which are the majority. This result unlocks a discussion regarding the type of information used to feed the machine. In case of DALL-E, many of its database was based on the online information available until 2023. Something we can assume in this case is that a big amount of architectural information received by the machine that gave us this output was characterized by renderings, architectural photography, warm light, dramatic images, wide angles perspective, etc. And these were the images that presented graphic features. It means lines, text, numbers, or anything that was not realistic. This is an example of how the prompt is extremely important to generate an image. In this particular example, we can see that we have a non-realistic image, a type of sketch. We can see these lines that resemble the dimensional lines we use in a project, and this is a reflection of a prompt where I use numbers. For example, I put 3 meters wide and the machine gave us the text 3 meters wide, literally. It's interesting that the machine understands things in quotes and also numbers and some very specific things in a literal way, not in the context of architecture. The machine actually copied these symbols and transformed them into pixels. So the machine doesn't have the general idea of the whole image. It has the idea of pixel by pixel. Now we have many examples of how images can be very theatrical and very dramatic, and we can see the contrast between light and shadow, and we see also the use of complementary colors like blue and orange. Also the diffused light is very present and angelic atmosphere. Once we had the word church in the prompt, it was almost automatic to have this ethereal and this celestial atmosphere. It's very interesting how these things are closely related. Now we can use this example to get to the architectural accuracy part of the analysis. We can see that the machines sometimes generate things that are not buildable. So we need to have the critical human thinking to know that this is not structurally correct. Here we have another example regarding structure. We have no information about the ceiling of the church, so we have three possibilities of church ceilings that existed in Venice, and they are the San Giacomo dell'Orio, the Chiesa di Santo Stefano, and also the Chiesa di Santa Maria della Visitazione. These three types of wooden ceiling could be existent in the church because it was the most common way of doing ceilings at the time. We see that the resulted images were something that can be related to what exists, but we have no structural elements to sustain this ceiling. So it is visually okay in terms of reference, but it's not something that would exist literally in real life. These are other elements with little details that were not accurate. For example, in the first image, when we look it closely, we have a repetition of elements before arriving to the columns. In the second image, we have a shape that is not an arc or not a triangle. So we see these small details that are not very accurate when we zoom in the images. Here you can see some other examples on the left images that show some details that would not exist in a real construction. And some other optical effects are very interesting too, because at the first sight we think that this is a symmetrical image, but when we look closely we see here in this base that the sides of the altar are not symmetrical. So now we get to a very interesting topic, which is related to the database that the machine uses. So when we Google Pietà, it is mainly Michelangelo's Pietà that shows up. It means that the internet is flooded with this information about Pietà. Even though we have many other types of Pietà throughout the history, to give an idea, this is a wooden Pietà on your right that is nowadays in the Oratory of Crociferi in Venice. And this from the same area and the same period of the Crociferi church. That is a very different Pietà from the Michelangelo one. And when generating the altar that has a description of a wooden Pietà, automatically the machine gave us back the Pietà that are very similar to the Michelangelo ones. That probably was not like this, since we have a reference from the same era. To conclude, when thinking from prompt to resource, I mean how the prompt influences the final image, such as the limitations we saw before. Mostly, these limitations are already reported by OpenAI. They have reports that shows that this type of things, such as the numbers, the specific expressions, the spatial awareness, were a weak point in the machine. But here, we saw this in an architectural context. At the current phase of DALL-E, with the current limitations, it is notable that this tool is very good for subjective, conceptual, and visual tasks. But as we saw before, maybe it's not the best idea for technical drawings, for example. Furthermore, some misinterpretations, for example, a word that can be a synonym in other contexts might not be a synonym in the architectural context. And when I say from resource to prompt, what I mean is how the online narratives and the online available data sets the tone for the results of the machine, because the machine is trained on this data. As a general conclusion and for the future, it is very important to have an approach to artificial intelligence also in the educational process. Since it's here and it's happening and students are using it and everyone is using it, is free and it's online, so ignoring it would be like ignoring AutoCAD when it was launched. About the interdisciplinary potential of AI, it deals with the collaborative and open source culture that we see since the beginning of the digital era. So this study is a very small particle of what is AI and how we can use that. So hopefully it can cooperate on creating curiosity on the theme. There is so much possibility and we can see many different paths of research. Since 2010, it is something that is rising and the production of articles, books and researches are growing, so we hope it can develop even more. Thank you very much for your attention.